All through my school years, summer vacation wasn't about going to Europe or Australia. It was about going to Nani's house, my grandmother's house. So all cousins from everywhere used to get together at my Nani's house. And this literally used to happen every single summer. I was probably youngest of my cousins. At least I felt that. And they were all elder to me. And you know what older brothers and sisters do to their siblings? They tease, right? They officially think teasing the younger ones is their birthright. My cousins weren't any different. They would tease me and I would get royally teased. I would go complain to my mom or aunt or whomsoever elder I could find, but nothing would really happen. And instead of saying sorry to me, my cousins used to get more kick on seeing my reaction. I would howl and I would cry, raising my voice to the maximum when arguing with them, but clearly they would only win. And my mother says when I was a little kiddo, typically I used to go to a corner, sulk with a pouted lower lip, crying over all the nasty remarks made to me. Has something like this happened to you also? You know that moment when an argument spirals out of control and suddenly you're screaming on top of your lungs, hands flying everywhere, and you're thinking, why am I so worked up? Well, here's the truth. Arguments don't have to turn into shouting matches. In fact, you can win any argument without even raising your voice. I realized it as I grew up, and today's episode is going to hit a little too close to home for some of you. And that's okay. Today we're talking about how to win every argument without ever raising your voice. You don't have to shout to make your point. In fact, I'm going to show you 3 strategies that can be the weapons in your secret armory. And as always, I've got some relatable stories and tips from my own life to keep things real. If you've ever found yourself in a heated argument with anyone, your friends, your family, your bosses, anyone, raising your voice and still feeling like you've lost, this episode is for you. So let's dive in. Years ago, when I was a new coach, I used to think that if I talk louder or if there was an argument and I was more forceful, I would automatically win. More volume equals more authority, right? Wrong. I remember a situation with my brother. We were discussing, he was feeling unappreciated at work and he was clearly frustrated. And as a coach, I was trying to steer him towards seeing the other's perspectives. And there I could feel his tension was rising. And then without realizing, and to emphasize what I was saying, I sort of raised my voice. Just a little, but I raised my voice. Not yelling, but enough to match his energy. And guess what happened? He shut down completely. Starting by crossing his arms, staring at me blankly, quietly and slowly, he slid out of the room. The conversation was dead. I realized that by raising my voice, I wasn't showcasing my point. I was only burning bridges. I was proving that I had lost control over the conversation. And that's what happens in most arguments. When we raise our voice, it's like we're waving a flag saying, I am not confident in what I'm saying. I need to shout to make my point. It triggers a defensive response in the other person. And suddenly, the argument isn't about the issue anymore. It's about who can shout louder. And believe you me, no one wins that. In one earlier episode about conquering stage fear, I talked at length about the fight or flight mode. And when we raise our voice, what it does is activates the other person's fight or flight response. The brain stops listening and the brain shifts into survival mode. You might as well be talking to a brick wall. So one of the biggest mistakes we all make, and believe you me, I still make them, we make during an argument is letting emotions drive our responses. It's normal. When we feel attacked, we act emotionally and we react very, very emotionally. I used to be controlled by my emotions and I was a cranky wreck all the time. I had to completely retool my weights and balances of my emotional reward system. And you can't completely eliminate angry feelings. It is perfectly normal. But what you can do is you can make changes to the way those events affect you and the way in which you respond to those events. If I can do it, you can too. This brings me to the first strategy to win an argument. How? Without raising your voice. So let's shift gears for the moment and talk about facts. But the secret is facts win arguments. That's right. One of my professional experiences is going to tell you this particular example, this particular strategy very clearly. I was working with the leadership team, and this was a particularly tense negotiation. There were two department heads and they were at each other's throats. Neither of them was willing to listen to the other one. One of them, Steve, he was getting louder and louder, and he was a strong, burly guy, and when he would speak louder, it was looking very intimidating. He was becoming a little aggressive. In every statement, there was an emotion, an angry emotion. It was all about why do we have to do things your way? We always have to listen to you. No one listens to us. Why can't we do it my way? There was no fact supporting any of this argument. On the other hand, Linda, she kept her voice steady. But here's what made her really stand out. She stuck to the facts. While Steve was arguing based on feelings, why don't we do things my way? Why do we have to do it your way? Linda would calmly say things like, I think we should not do it this way because the last time we did it, we had to recall the entire product from the market. And that quarter, if you look back here on the charts, our losses were substantial. The room was quiet because Linda cited data and examples. She was unshakable. She was speaking quietly, gently. Why? Because she had the facts. Whatever she was saying was not based on reaction. It was not based on any emotion. She did not need her voice to be loud. And what she was saying was purely based on facts. And even if Steve was the louder one, guess who won the argument in the end? Linda, that's right. And did Linda need to raise her voice? Absolutely not. Not even once. And did Steve's raising his voice help him win the argument? Well, it did help, but it did help Steve to lose the argument. So when emotions are high, just follow one simple strategy. Get your facts in place and fall back on those facts. Facts are your secret weapon. They are not debatable. They are not emotional. They are simply the truth. And facts are what will make you win the argument. If your facts are correct, they will speak for themselves. You won't have to shout to lay them out. Just speak firm. Speak with authority, that's fine. But that doesn't need you to raise your voice. There's no need to become the emotional, supercharged person there. You can just win the argument without raising your voice, because when you become emotional, it weakens your presentation of the facts. Remember, facts don't care about your feelings. They only help you come out ahead in a debate. It's almost impossible to argue with the facts, so keep your facts strong, keep them in good shape, and the argument will definitely turn in your favor. Throughout my life, I've always been soft-spoken. My voice often does not reach across the room if I don't have a mic, because I'm a little softer when I'm speaking. So I've never really found myself winning any argument with raising my voice, because my voice hasn't been loud. So this strategy has always helped me win arguments, because facts don't need to be spelled out loud. I always suggest that whenever you listen to this episode, you have a pen and paper ready. Why? Because if you purely listen, it's very easy to forget. What you need to do is you need to apply, and that's what we're going to do now. So after listening to this strategy about winning the argument without raising your voice, purely with facts, I want you to do a small little exercise. Look back in time. Maybe a week, a month ago, whatever. When was the last time you lost an argument? Did you raise your voice at that time? Did you become emotional? Be honest. And most importantly, at that time, did you lay down any facts or did you have a purely emotional reaction? Note it down. The next thing that you need to do is think of some facts that you could have said that time, which obviously you didn't because you were focused on raising your voice, you were emotional. So think of the facts that you could have said then. That would have turned the argument in your favor. Also, think of the other person that you were arguing with. Who won the argument? Did he lay down some facts? Did those facts help him win the argument? When you do this exercise, you will realize what you could have done differently to win the argument without raising your voice. It's very important to apply what you learn because that's what makes the learning complete. Remember, in school also, we used to have exercises at the end of every chapter because it's those exercises that help reinforce the facts we have learned. Don't forget to share with me your reaction to this strategy or how this strategy made you win an argument. Post your story on Insta and share with me on my Insta handle, which is Communicate101. If you find this technique worthy of a thumbs up, don't forget to rank and review this episode because in reality, you're the reason I hit the record button for every podcast episode. Let's move on to the second strategy in the next leg. I remember this one time during a family gathering. We had this family wedding and everyone was buzzing and there was laughter everywhere. Typically, there was food on the table. And then, bam, there was a heated debate which erupted between my cousin Rekha and my uncle. It was over politics, nothing personal. But now Rekha, she's very sharp-witted, she's very smart, very quick. And my uncle, he's a master at long-winded rants. So suddenly everyone realized that this argument had become quite loud and typically, like everyone does, they settled in to watch this verbal tennis match. I kind of had the front row seat because I was sitting on the same table. And here's when things got interesting. Initially, both of them were super loud and they were speaking their side of the story. They were both convinced what they're saying is right. And clearly, this wasn't going anywhere. Uncle was older, he was very clear. I know more than you. Rekha was very sharp. And actually, in that particular argument, I could see Rekha was the person who was right. But when both indulged in that shouting match, it was just a heated argument, like any heated argument, and clearly no one was winning. Suddenly, something happened. And this something is a very valuable lesson. This came from Rekha. Instead of jumping in with her usual sharp responses, she tried something different. You know what she did? She just sat back. She listened. Really listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't roll her eyes. She didn't even give one hint of disagreement to Uncle. She nodded thoughtfully at whatever Uncle was saying, at all his points, and occasionally she threw in a simple, that's interesting. Oh, I hadn't thought of it that way. My uncle was surprised. He was expecting the usual back and forth. And suddenly I realized Uncle started slowing down. His arguments became less passionate, less certain. And then without her saying a word of rebuttal, he paused. He thought for a moment and he said, maybe I've been looking at it the wrong way. I couldn't believe it. Uncle was agreeing with Rekha. Rekha had clearly won the argument without actually engaging in the usual battle of words. How did she do it? By simply staying silent and letting my uncle express his views clearly and fully without resisting them. She made space for him to question his own stance. It wasn't about silence being a sign of submission. It wasn't about, letting him feel that she's agreeing with whatever he's saying, and he's right and she's wrong. It was about letting the other person feel heard. And in the end, they both walked away with a more open mind than before. So this taught me a very valuable lesson. Sometimes the most powerful things you can say in an argument is by saying nothing at all. I'm not asking you to become submissive. I'm not asking you not to speak your point across. I'm just asking you to use the strategy called silence at the right time. One of the best techniques I've heard in arguments is using silence. And this might sound counterintuitive. How can you win an argument by saying nothing, right? But silence is one of the most powerful tools in your communication toolkit. I've seen this firsthand. I showed you the personal example. I've seen it in professional settings as well. It's very funny. When you stay calm, the others subconsciously mirror your behavior. So if you scream, they also scream. If you raise your voice, they also raise your voice. You don't need to yell to make that impact. What you need is control. That control is your superpower. Lesson learned. Now I apply this trick, this strategy everywhere, wherever I can. Only last year, I'll never forget this time when I was sitting in a meeting with a client who was very convinced their marketing strategy was flawless. So how can you convince somebody who's super convinced himself? They had the numbers in hand, they had the graphs displayed on the big screen, and a tone that screamed, "I'm right, and you know it." They had the facts. The problem is, the strategy wasn't working. And my job as a communication coach was to help them see that without bruising egos. My initial instinct was to dive in, argue point by point, and list all the reasons that their approach was outdated. Putting the facts across. But instead, I recalled the lesson I'd learned from Rekha. So I tried a different tactic. I heard them. I simply stayed quiet. Every time the team presented a reason or a point of data, I listened attentively. Actually listened, I nodded, and yet I stayed silent. Eventually, they started second-guessing themselves. The more they talked, the more they began to realize holes in their argument. And they started backtracking. Maybe we haven't accounted for this. I suppose we could tweak this part. This was them saying, without my saying anything. At that moment, I won the argument without saying a word. By staying silent, I created a space for the client to reflect on their own position. I didn't need to jump in. I didn't need to be defensive. Because in the absence of my rebuttals, all they had to do was to fill the void with more reasoning. And that led them straight to the flaws in their own strategy. And they were convinced their strategy had holes. By the end of the meeting, the client was suggesting all the changes that I would have recommended. I didn't have to say that. And all I did was sit back, listen, and let them talk themselves into the solution. Silent isn't just staying quiet, isn't just a pause. It's a powerful, very powerful communication tool. In this case, it allowed me to win the argument without even needing to engage in one. Sometimes speaking nothing at all speaks volumes. Remember when you and your partner have had one of those classic, who's doing more around the whole house conversations? I do so much. What do you do? Things escalate, right? Voices are raised. That time I'd insist you stay quiet. Completely. No snarky remarks, no interruptions. Just let the silence hang in there. And believe you me, the energy in the room will shift without raising your voice. Your partner will start talking rather than shouting. And now he would be explaining himself, not defending. It'll give you the space to actually listen. And when you respond, you'll realize the argument is not there at all. It disappeared. Now, when you're being silent, you need to make sure there's one thing that you don't forget, that you don't miss. And this is a very, very crucial point about the strategy of being silent. So, note it down very carefully. Now, when you're silent, make sure all of you is silent. Because what happens is, more than often, we don't realize our body is talking even when our mouth isn't. So make sure your entire body language is communicating that silence. If you like me to go into detail or you want me to coach you or your team on that, just write to me on my Insta handle, Communicate101, or shoot me an email. Like always, my email is info@sarikasingh.in. Having said that, always remember that silence gives you the upper hand because it allows the other person to reflect on what they've just said. It's like giving them a mirror to hear themselves. And trust me, nothing disarms a heated argument faster than a well-paced silence. Try this strategy out and let me know how it worked for you. You can share your story on my Insta handle, which is Communicate101. When I started coaching, I was in my early 20s. And you know how most people think you need to be a grey-haired professor to really teach anything to anyone. Establishing authority at a young age can be hugely challenging, especially when people tend to equate leadership with experience and age and those grey hair. Leadership of any type has zero age limit and has no strict set of rules. It's about how you inspire, how you communicate, and how you drive results. Not your birth date, not some magical checklist or qualities. And I've struggled with it, making everyone realize that. I'm resisting the temptation to launch into a full-blown rant right now, but I'll just stick to the point. Now, I know what you're thinking. If I can't raise my voice, how do I sound assertive? Because I want to sound assertive. Now, I'm going to share a secret which no one will tell you. To sound assertive, that is to make sure your voice is heard, you need your voice, all right. But what you don't need is volume. You just need the right tone. You can be firm without being loud, without having that volume. This is something I teach my clients all the time, especially those who work in high-pressure environments where tempers often flare. I once coached Melanie. She's a team leader who was dealing with constant clashes among her team because every meeting that she was chairing turned into a shouting match. Melanie was soft-spoken, pretty much like me, and she was not very tall, again like me, and not intimidating looking, again much like me. So I could totally relate when she said, "Sarika, I feel powerless to control it." Well, getting back on track, I told Melanie to try something that worked personally for me because I was sure this is going to work for her as well. Here's what I told her to do. Melanie, keep your tone low. And even if, no matter how heated the room gets, just keep your tone low. It took practice, but after a few weeks, she got back to me saying that to her surprise, her team was now following her lead. Instead of trying to outshout each other, they began lowering their voices too. When she spoke calmly with authority, people listened. She didn't need to raise her voice because her presence and most importantly, her tone commanded respect. The key here is when you respond in a calm, controlled manner, people will begin to associate that with authority. You become the person they want to listen to because you never lose your cool. I told Melanie one more thing, and this one is super important, so make a note of it. If you're on your notepad or your memory book, be sure to make a note of it. Let's be honest, most arguments stem from a place of feeling misunderstood. We dig in our heels and we fight out harder because we are convinced the other person just doesn't get it. Usko samajh hi nahi aata. There is absolutely no communication possible till empathy becomes your best friend. I had a client who was once struggling with her teenage daughter. You know how teenagers are very rebellious, very clear in their head that they don't want anybody to tell them anything. So this mom and daughter were constantly arguing, especially about screen time. Mom tried everything, rules, punishments, even raising her voice, but nothing worked. Finally, we tried something radical. We tried empathy. The next time her daughter started arguing, instead of launching into the lecture, she said, I know it's frustrating when I set these limits. I'm sure it feels like I don't understand how important your phone is to you. Guess what happened? Her daughter still didn't like the rules, but she felt understood. And that changed the game. That changed the entire dynamic. The tension dissolved. Empathy doesn't mean you have to agree, but it shows the other person that you care about their feelings. And when somebody feels you care about their feelings, they are on your side of the table, not on the opposite side of the table. It's the ultimate way to win an argument because it takes away the fuel that powers most conflicts. So to recap, here's how you can win any argument without raising your voice. Number 1, you use facts over feelings. Number 2, you use silence to your advantage. And number 3, you really listen with your whole body, not just with your mouth, but you listen and you stay quiet. Listen with empathy to connect, not correct, by mastering your tone, keeping it calm, steady, and winning the race. At the end of the day, argument winning isn't about being the loudest. It's about being the most effective. And when your approach of every argument starts with a disagreement, that argument is finished. So, approach it with calm confidence and people will not only listen to you, but they will also respect you for it. Thanks for tuning in today. Remember, the next time you find yourself in an argument, take a deep breath, keep your voice low, and watch how things shift in your favor. If you like this episode, don't forget to hit subscribe, leave a review, and share with someone who could use a little help in winning their argument the next time. Until next time, keep those conversations flowing, and yes, don't raise your voice. Thank you for listening to this episode of Communicate 101 Speaking Writing Tips with Sarika Singh. If you want to be notified of upcoming episodes, be sure to hit the subscribe button and follow the podcast. I'll be back to share more stories, more life experiences, and more communication tips every Friday. If you want to reach me or connect with me, just put your comments in the comment box below or mail me at info@sarikasingh.in. I know you're going to rate and review this podcast, so a big thank you in advance. Stay tuned and think about what we talked today.